everybody, I'm Miss Kaleigh and welcome back to my directing class. If you aren't already aware, this is a directing intensive. It is meant for anyone who is interested in directing, specifically on the community theater level, but it can be anywhere from educational theater, it can be for high school students or young actors interested in potentially directing one day, or it can be for adults who have already directed. I'm just sharing my tips and advice. I'm a director in the area, and I've done some classes on this, so I'm just sharing my advice and tips and tricks on being a director for community theater. So we started with what it takes to be a good director in week 1. This is currently week 5. So you can go back and see any of these videos, and it really doesn't matter which order that you watch them in. They will all work individually on their own. Some things I'll refer to from previous videos, but for the most part, you can take them individually. So the first one was about being a good director and also show selection. The second one was about casting and auditions. The third one was about blocking and scheduling blocking and all the organizational things that go into being a director. And then last week's was about directing specifically for actors and different ages of actors and how you might change your directing style based on the age group that you're directing. And also building your reputation as a director and what you should be looking at and considering when you're directing different types of theater. So those are all the things that we've been back through before, and I encourage you to go look at any of those videos and please comment on them and message me if you're interested in asking any questions about any of that, or if there's something you feel like I didn't cover that you would like me to go back and cover. I'd be happy to do that. So this is going to be the first in a couple of episodes, classes, on play analysis. So the next couple of classes will go together because they will be talking specifically about how, as a director, you should approach analyzing a play. So we're outside today because it's beautiful, and I thought, why not? So please forgive me if there's any outside extraneous noise. I'm going to try to keep these a tad shorter than my previous classes just because the information is a little more difficult and it's kind of a lot. So I'm going to talk about things, and then, like I said, we'll move over to the next week talking a little bit more. So play analysis. Now that might sound a little bit dry or boring because anytime we think of analysis, we think of like literature analysis, which I'm an English teacher, so it kind of works perfect for me because I really do actually like analyzing things for literature. But analyzing, even though that word is like, it sounds very educational or whatever, it's just really breaking something apart. And as a director, of course it is your job to break apart a play and to know every aspect of that play so that you can be the expert on the play for your actors. Because if you have not properly analyzed the play, then you're nothing more than a glorified stage manager. Because what does the director do? It is their job to know that play so they can give direction to the actors. It's not the actor's job to know every aspect of that play, the themes behind it, what's important in it, all of the setting and the background information, all that stuff. I mean, they have to do that for their own characters, but you as the director should be the authority. And so how are you going to be the authority unless you actually do the work? And yeah, this does require some work. It requires some homework. So what should you start with? Well, you should definitely start with a play that you're passionate about, that makes you feel something. Now, I understand that sometimes we have plays chosen for us to direct, and it's not necessarily something that you're passionate about. I think you should, at that point, make it a goal to find something in that play that you feel is worthy of getting across to an audience, something that you connect with and that you think it is an important message of that play. Or otherwise, you're going to be disconnected from it the entire time, and that is definitely not a great place for a director to be. So the first time you read through a play, I mean, obviously it's very different than tackling a novel or something like that. And sometimes the first time any of us come to a play is via the movie or a stage production that we've already seen. And so we feel like maybe we read through it a little bit faster or something because we feel like we know it. But you can't approach a play that way. You really need to pay attention as you're reading through it to the dialogue, because the dialogue is the play. A lot of us, we look at a play and we see this long description in the beginning of what the author has said a room looks like or something like that. or we pay attention to some of the background information in there and things like that, that is not the play itself. You should understand that. A lot of times those descriptions, whether they're by the author or not, are written from the first production, and they're just trying to give like an English reader, somebody who's in an English class, an idea of what to picture in their minds when they are reading this play. It is not for directors to try to replicate what is said in the beginning of that play or any description in that play. That's not what it's there for. So you should understand that right at the beginning. And if it's going to be, a lot of times if we see something in words, we think, well, this is what it has to be. And so we see that long description in the beginning of Tennessee Williams plays, and we think, well, that's exactly what the room needs to look like. But no, that was written by probably a stage manager from the first production to give future readers of this a potential idea of what they're looking at on stage. If it's going to hinder you, I encourage you to just block that stuff out. Just go through with a black marker and black it all out so you are not tempted to think that that's exactly what you have to do. Same thing with stage directions. You know, actor crosses left across the stage as she says this line. All of that is in there to give a picture in your minds, but not for you to use as a director necessarily. So if you can use it in a responsible way, like as a suggestion and, oh, I might consider that, then sure, read it. But if it's gonna make you feel like you're tied to doing those things, I encourage you to go through and block them all out, because those are not the play. The dialogue is the play. And so everything that you get from the play, analysis-wise, should be in the dialogue. So we're going to talk about that more in the future. The other thing that you should consider when you're picking up a play is what feelings that it invokes in you. That is going to be your perception of the play. And that's going to be you as a director, what you want to put up as your perception of the play. You want to invoke those feelings, because assuming that's what's drawn you to the play, are those feelings passionate, or they've made you feel something good about the world, bad about the world, whatever, it's caused some sort of spark within you. And that same spark is what you want to put up on the stage to have your audience members feel. And so you need to think, as you're reading through the play a second time, what was it in that play that caused that spark? Was it particular ways that words were said? Was it particular phrases? Was it a scene, a very particularly impactful scene, an actor's reaction? What were those things that really brought those feelings out in you? And I would go search through the script for those things so that you can see why, and you can kind of focus on why this play means something to you. That's where you need to start. Why does this play mean something to you? And try to find those moments, those dialogue moments in the script to find that, because I think that that's the best place to start, because then you know which scenes you're going to be passionate about and which scenes that you're going to really need to have work for you to get your vision across. Secondly, as you're reading a play, you need to understand that, and of course, because a lot of us, we're Wonderland, we're talking about musical theater in most cases, we understand that plays are not realism. But some plays are written as realism, and we think, that they should be representative of real natural life. But we have to remember that a play is simply an artistic representation of something. It is not real life. A play is not a photograph of real life. It is, I think of it more of as like a Monet painting. It is a perception. It is an impression of real life, and that's what's going to make us really feel something. So trying to replicate real life on stage is not going to be as impactful to an audience as your artistic representation of it. There's a story that Stanislavski, when he was developing his method, that he decided to have he had a scene from Chekhov set in a garden, and he had some actors go out in the garden to do the scene, and he expected it to just come to life because they were there in the actual real setting, and it was just going to be like he was watching real life happen there in the garden, and it just fell flat for him. It didn't work at all. And he said at that moment that he realized that realism, although we call it realism, it's not the exact representation of real life. A good director knows the difference between the art form, but also how they're related. So a play is not life, but it is an art form, a made object that may have a likeness to life, but is definitely not real life. So remember that, and don't get yourself into this idea that it needs to look exactly like real life. It is an impression. Give yourself some freedom on that. So play analysis, going through and really understanding the play, is your tool and your support for your feelings about something. So if you want the actors to do a particular thing, if you have analyzed your play properly, then you are the expert and you have your reasoning behind why you want a scene a particular way. So if they do ask, you have support for it. That's what play analysis does for you, and that's what you need to do to be a good director. So first I want to think a little bit about, to understand a play as it is, you need to understand something of the structure of plays, and the structure of musicals or operas or something are very different. A play, a lot of time we start act one and it takes place all in the same day, all in the same room. And act two might be a couple of hours later, it might be a couple of months later, but usually it's going to be in that same room that same day. And I'm talking about mainly realistic plays at this point, Tennessee Williams, something like that. Little Foxes that I directed a few years ago. Musicals obviously are very different. We have many different locations, we have many different set pieces and things like that to consider. So when you're approaching something, you need to kind of look at how it's set up. And obviously Shakespeare is going to be completely different from that too. So you kind of need to have a little bit of theater knowledge to know, theater history knowledge to know what you're looking at there. Are you looking at a realistic play? And that, when I speak in terms of a realistic play, I'm usually talking about something that was written from the very late 1800s, early 1900s on to current day, and it's a play. A musical, usually I'm speaking of a book musical, started in the late 1930s all the way obviously to today, and then operas and other things would definitely fall into a different category. But Shakespeare has a completely different structure, and also Greek plays have a completely different structure. So all of those things would need to be tackled as you're reading it slightly differently, because you would understand the structure. For example, in a Shakespeare play, we always have 5 acts, and the first act we kind of meet extraneous characters and get a setup of the environment. The second act, we have the rising action begin to happen. Usually in the third act, everything starts to hit the fan and we really get some intense action. The fourth act, everything goes, well, I'm talking about tragedies specifically, but everything tends to go really wrong. And then in the fifth act, we have a resolution of everything of some sort. So understanding that helps me when I'm going to read a Shakespeare play, because I know what I'm looking for in each act. Realism is no different. And musicals should also be no different. So setting up that understanding the structure of a play. Musical, we usually start with an opening number that is kind of like, hey, this is a musical, just to get us into that so that the audience is prepared for what you're going to see tonight is not realism, it's a musical. We're opening with a, hey, this is a musical number. Then we usually, and very early on in the musical, get to an I want song. What is the main character? What does the protagonist want? And it goes forward throughout. We have to end the first act with some sort of resolution, some sort of almost a placeholder or a foreshadowing what's going to happen in the second act, something to tempt you to continue on further. It's going to somewhat resolve what happened in the first act, but it's also going to try to lead you into the next act. And the beginning of the next act, we usually are going to be opening with something fairly high energy, because they want to get you back in, because you just had your drink, you know, in the audience, and you've just gone to the restroom and everything, and we need to reel you back into the story. So all of these things, you can definitely, you know, search this on the internet, kind of like the structure of musical. These are all things that you need to understand to some degree as you're going into reading a play or a musical, to see how it fits up, maybe how it differs from a traditional structure, and how it's going to assist you in telling the story. Remember I said those feelings that you have, getting across the feelings that you initially felt when reading the show, which parts of those are going to be most beneficial? which songs are a breather for the audience to release the tension from some of the more serious things that have happened in the show. Where are the comedic moments? Where are the super emotional moments? Where is the audience going to cry? All of those things are things that you need to pay attention to structure-wise as you're reading your musical. So definitely pay attention to those moods and feelings, because the structure is part of creating that. So that's my first thing, is get yourself a little bit of an understanding of the structure of whatever it is you're reading. And know that the style will change the structure. Your different styles mainly are going to be Greek theater, Shakespeare, French comedies kind of have a completely different style than everything else, realism, and then of course musical theater. So next, after you've read the play all the way through a couple of times, you've read it first just for like oh, what is this? Let me read this and see what I think about it. And the second time you read it, you thought, okay, I felt this the first time I read it through. Now let me pinpoint the things that made me feel that. You've done those things. The third time you read it through for the analysis, let's say now you're like, okay, I'm definitely directing this. I need to start analyzing this for direction. You are going to go through and pay attention to the given circumstances of the play. Now, Stanislavski talks about given circumstances for actors, for them to go through and understand what's happened to their character, maybe before the play has started, and who their character is. Given circumstances always come from dialogue. It's just like I said before, do not pay attention to the descriptions of the rooms or anything like that. You are looking for what are the given circumstances in the dialogue, and don't add given circumstances in. An example of that is just because you think you know something about the South, don't add in information about the South into your given circumstances if you're directing a play set in the South. Now, is it important as a director to be kind of someone who knows a lot about the world in general, kind of a very well-rounded person, so that if you do approach cabaret, you somewhat understand what was going on in Berlin before World War II? Yes, absolutely. But that knowledge should not change what you're seeing in the dialogue and make its way to the paper when you are going through and writing down the given circumstances. For example, when I directed Little Foxes, it was set in Alabama. I've lived in Alabama, and it was set at the turn of the century, 1900s, right in that time period. So I love history. I have a little bit of knowledge of what Alabama might have been like in that time period. I've been to the town where it was set and driven through and seen some of those old houses. But when I went through to write down the given circumstances, even though I did some research and allowed myself to see those things, like I went and looked at pictures of what the house actually would have been, because Lillian Hellman was writing of her own true experiences from her own family. I did that research. I went and looked those things up. But when I'm writing down the given circumstances of the play, I'm only writing what Lillian Hellman wrote in the dialogue for me. When they say, your dad cheated poor people in this town out of their money by overcharging them on sugar, that is a given circumstance of the play. It is a previous action. It's something that came before the play happened, because the dad is no longer there. But it is important in how these characters in my play are developed, because they come from a background of parents who set up the expectation that cheating poor people is okay. So do you see what I did there? Like, I understand something about poor people in Alabama, but I'm not putting that into my given circumstances. I just understand why that might have happened. So, given circumstances come from dialogue. It is your only reliable source of given circumstances. Don't add anything in. And this is important. Don't change it whether or not the playwright is being historically accurate. So, the playwright could be wrong. They could have made a choice to not include things that are historically accurate in their play. That is not your decision to change it. If you don't like that, don't do that play. Your job is to interpret the playwright, their words, through your vision. So don't change things to make them historically accurate just because you know something about it. Dialogue is the only reliable source of your given circumstances. So your given circumstances are going to be your environmental facts, the things about where the play is set, when it is set, geographical location, date, economic information, political information, social environment, and their religious environment. All of those things could be in your environmental facts from your given circumstances. So you need to go through and look for all of those and keep a log of all of them, however you want to, so that you understand the setting of your play. And of course, setting means more than just where and when. It means all of those things that went into it. Like I said, these people are wealthy, but they are not old wealth. They are new wealth built upon the fact that, in the Little Foxes, built upon the fact that they cheated poor people in their town out of their money, raised prices during the war, and so they have new wealth and they want more new wealth. The other thing, second part of, so that's the very first part of given circumstances, is environmental facts, and all of those things you need to consider. By the way, I am still working out of the book Play Directing, Analysis, Communication, and Style by Frances Hodge. Get this book if you are interested. It is on Amazon, and all of this is in there in much greater detail. This is just a little taste of some of this. So the second part of given circumstances that you consider is previous action. Previous action is really important to your play itself because a lot of times it has influenced how everybody ended up where they are right now as your play is starting. For the Little Foxes, it was very important that my characters, like I said, came from a family that developed their wealth based on cheating poor people, that the previous action was they had just been to dinner, just had a fancy dinner with this very wealthy man from Chicago in which they wined and dined him in order to try to gain more wealth. A previous action is that one of our main characters, Horace, has gone out of state to get treatment for his health. All of these things are previous action. So I encourage you to go through your play at that point and underline anything that is previous action. Previous action is like I said, still revealed in dialogue, and it can be something that happened many, 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 many years ago. In Act 2 of my play, one of the main characters talks about when she was a 17-year-old, because she did come from old money, and she discusses one particular evening where she met her husband, and she details it. And it is important that we see it through her eyes, and it is important previous action because it has completely shaped who she is today, why she ended up where she is, and why she is the way she is. So I encourage you to go through and underline all of the previous action in the play, anything that happened before the play started, because then that will help you understand what the present action in the play is, what is actually happening currently in your play, and how the previous action connects to it. So after you've underlined all your previous action, if you list them all on one side of a page in like a chart, and you list all of the present actions in your play, you can draw lines from how the previous action influenced your present action in the play. So Bertie, the character in my play, married Oscar, her husband. He was new money. She saw him at a ball. This previous action of her feeling like a princess that night led her to marrying this guy. Our present action on stage, he hits her in one scene. So we see that her being caught up in the trappings of her glamorous life led her to a decision that now leads to her being abused. So it's really good for you as a director to look at all of those things and how they influence the characters as you are in that scene, because it's definitely going to influence how Bertie, that character, is played on stage. Because the way somebody accepts a slap or abuse on stage obviously has to be influenced by that previous action of why she ended up there. She blames herself because she was the one who got caught up in it and trained, and all of that drama. She got caught up in it and loved it. And so now she blames herself. So when she doesn't blame him when he abuses her, she blames herself. But we wouldn't know that if we didn't pay attention to that previous action. It's so important. Even in comedies, there's a French play called The Way of the World, and there is a line in the dialogue that Mirabelle was once a lover of one of the other main characters. He left her pregnant and then arranged for her marriage to the man that she's currently married to. It's like almost like a throwaway line, but it's in there. But if you watch the action through the rest of the play, most of it involves Mirabelle and him, the guy that she married. And so it's like, you wouldn't understand any of that if you missed out on some of that previous action. So previous action is so important. Make sure you don't miss anything. There's so much in there. And it's also important in the previous action, hopefully it's a good playwright and they have written the descriptions of the previous action in a way that the audience isn't going to get bored. Because, you know, sometimes we don't have, it's not a movie where we have flashback. Like sometimes we do in plays and it'll go to a different part of the stage. And if it is, as a director, it's it's important for you to be able to represent that in a way that the audience understands what's happening, that is literally a flashback, either through lighting or the way the actors are dressed, something like that, to show that it's different. But sometimes it's just an actor reminiscing, and the audience has to just listen to what they're saying and go on that. So hopefully if you're reading and doing a good play, a good musical, the author of that show has set it up in a way that the audience can go on that journey and can understand what they're saying. Like I said in Little Foxes, Bertie had this big long speech about that, and we really needed to be able to go on that journey with her. And so I had to think, how am I going to have her tell that story in a way that the audience is going to be entranced? So you need to think about those things. In Next to Normal musical, in the second act, there's a whole song that is this is what happened. It's a reveal of a previous action, and it's so important to the show because it's what the show hinges on, and we finally get it. That's going to be an important moment for you as a director to make sure that the audience hears every single word, that they see every single image from that previous action. So those are super things to focus on. The third thing, so we talked about environmental facts, previous actions. The third part of given circumstances that you need to pay attention to on your beginning of your analysis of your play are polar attitudes. So all of your characters in your play, as in real life, are conditioned by their world and what they've been through, and it's set up some sort of attitude within them about things. People don't change. Their attitudes about things in the play change. And what you're really going to be looking at is the principal characters in your play, or character. Who are they, and how does their attitude change in the play? And we call it polar attitudes because you think of a pole at the beginning of the play. What is their attitude when the play started? And the other pole, the South Pole, the North Pole, South Pole, is how does their attitude change by the end of the play? So it's like an arc, the play, getting them to this point. And all this stuff in the middle is the stuff that it's the outside influences that changes that attitude. That is the story of the play. That is the journey that you're following. Sometimes it's two principal characters that you're going to be following their story concurrently, or it's together, but that's sort of rare, and it's difficult for a playwright to do well. Sometimes it's told in two parallel stories, like we have a secondary couple and their stories being told, and we have a principal couple and their stories being told. But you need to look through the play or musical and figure out whose story is this. How does their attitude change? How has it changed from the beginning of the play to the end of the play? And what are all of the influences in the play throughout that create those attitudes and that change them? It's pressures from the outside forces. Every single character that's put in there, all of those secondary characters are put there to be a force on that principal character to change their attitudes. So it's very important for you to, when you're reading that play, think to yourself, whose journey is this? What is their attitude at the beginning? What is their attitude at the end? And what are the forces throughout the play that change those attitudes. And then you can go through and start ranking the forces that you think are most effective, the ones that created that emotional response in you from the beginning of the play. Because a lot of times that's what those moments that you're going to need to focus on throughout the play, because if they affected you and made you feel something, then there's a reason. So gosh, I know that that's a lot. I was going to get on to something else today, but I feel like that's so much information that I kind of want to stop there and make this like a slightly shorter video. I encourage you to do this. Go read a play or a musical and look at, first of all, those feelings. Second of all, the given circumstances. After you've looked at structure, given circumstances, what are the environmental things of that play that you need to know about, that the author gives you through the dialogue? Secondly, what are the previous actions that have occurred? And thirdly, what are the polar attitudes? How do they change in the principal character? I think looking at those things is really going to give you a great feel for where to get started on analyzing that play. It's going to make you have a really good grasp on what you want to put up on the stage and what's so important. I knew when I was directing Little Foxes that there was a moment when the main character, the principal character, lets her husband die on the stairs, and I knew that that was so impactful for me. It was my favorite part of the play. It was the part of the play that made me want to direct that play. And so I knew that that moment had to be presented in a way that would be impactful for the audience, like it was impactful for me. And so then I had to look into the why. Why is it that way? What previous circumstances made that happen? What do I think need the actors to actually do to pull off that moment in the play? So I encourage you to go look at some other play. I'd love to hear what plays you're looking at and any questions that you have about this. Like I said, I felt like we got a little deep today, but that's what directing is. It is not just setting something up, looking at the dialogue and putting something up on the stage. You need to think about every single thing, and that's what's going to set you apart from other community theater directors, is the fact that everything that you've put on the stage, you've had thought go into, and it is your vision, showing the playwright's story, telling that story properly through your vision on the stage, and you actually have a clear vision. Like I said, drop any questions below, any plays that you're currently reading, any insights that you have about this, and come back next week because we're going to talk even further about analyzing plays. We're going to get into the dialogue and the importance of the actual dialogue in your analysis. So hope everybody has a great week. See you next Thursday.